Depending on exactly who you ask, electric vehicles like this one are either going to save the world or they're going to end it. They're either a true green motoring solution or they're a total sham. Talk about polar opposites, but you and I, we're regular, considered, reasonable people, and we know that the truth always lies somewhere in the middle, which is why I spent 3 months behind the wheel of this MG4 77 to try and figure out exactly where we're at with EVs, how one fits into my everyday life, and whether my little urban family is ready to leave the petrol pump in the rearview mirror. So if you're trying to figure out exactly what's going to be powering your next new car, stick around because I will give you my real, unvarnished truth on what it's been like to live with the MG4 over the past couple of months. But first, a little about me. And normally I'd never bore you with these kind of details, but I guess it's probably important to figure out if my life looks like your life. So we're a fairly typical urban family, first baby on the way, most of our lives spent in town, but with plenty of longer distance trips on the weekend. I have off-street parking and I've recently installed a wall box charger, which means I can top up an EV much faster than if I was using a regular household plug. And that's important because the convenience of home charging is a real make or break in the EV world, I reckon. If you're stuck using public charging infrastructure all of the time, then I suspect that will grow old fairly quickly. Anyway, they're my specs, so how about the cars? Now, the secret of the MG4's driving range lies in those two little numbers that follow the model name, with the 51, 64 or this 77 denoting the size of the battery. Now, obviously the range grows with the battery, which means this one offers the most at 530 kilometers on the WLTP cycle. Now, you're unlikely to get that in the real world, but even if you bank on, say, 450 Ks, that should be enough to get you there and back again on most weekends. Now, when it comes time to charge, the MG4 77 is set up for 150 kilowatt DC fast charging, which means when you find an appropriate charger, it should go from 0 to 80% charged in about 40 minutes. Now, my wall box at home is more like 7 kilowatts, which means it takes around 9 hours to go from empty to full. And of course, if you're using a regular old home socket, it's going to take even longer still. Still, I guess the point is you can plug it in overnight and wake up to a fully charged car every single morning. But to be honest with you, I don't really find myself doing that. I tend to just plug it in here and there and keep the car hovering between about 40 and 60% charged. In fact, I only ever really plug it in overnight if I've got a long trip planned. Now, on that, anyone who tells you that an EV is every bit as easy to live with as an ICE vehicle is lying to you. It's really that simple. It's not a deal breaker by any means, but there is undeniably more to think about when you own an electric car. In my first weeks with the vehicle, we'd planned a trip down to Callala Bay, just over 2 hours from Sydney, and I'd left my place with about 75% charge in the MG4's 77 kilowatt hour battery. And the plan was simple: head down the coast without stopping to charge, plug the MG4's included home charger into a regular power point, and then drive home. But then we discovered the fly screens couldn't be removed from their house's windows, making running the charging cable impossible. Okay, then plan B, we located a slow charger in nearby Nowra, plugged in, and over about 2 hours, took on enough charge to make it back to Shell Harbour, where an ultra-fast charger awaited. All of which was annoying, but not catastrophic, and yes, you can accuse me of poor planning, but I'd argue that it's also planning that's simply not required in an ICE vehicle. Now, interestingly, we made almost the exact same trip about a month later, and that time it was plan A all the way. We drove down, plugged in using the house's power, then drove home again, and never saw a petrol station forecourt. On that trip, having an EV genuinely made life easier. And to be honest, it's a similar story here in the city, where this MG couldn't be easy to live with, and petrol prices have become something of a fading memory. So I'm standing at the bonnet, but I guess that's because old habits die hard. Of course, it's not really all that relevant in an electric vehicle, especially this one, which is powered by a rear-mounted electric motor, which means rear-wheel drive, that makes 180 kilowatts and 350 newton meters. That means a 0 to 100 time of 6.5 seconds and a top speed of 180 kilometers an hour. The good stuff is fairly obvious. It's ferociously well equipped. The tech is all present with big screens, LED lighting, wireless charging, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. And I reckon it looks great with its 18-inch alloys and swept-back sporty styling. And unlike some China-developed vehicles, I found the active safety systems fairly unobtrusive and easy to live with too. So let's talk about this MG4 specifically, because there's some stuff that I really like about it and some stuff that is driving me a little bit bonkers. But let's start with the good. I love the way that it looks outside. I think it looks kind of unique. I love the light treatment front and back, but I also like the way it looks in the cabin. It's kind of pared back and subtle, and this black on black design theme helps it feel a little bit premium. There's also plenty of room in the front seat, but also in the back seat, so you can move adults in something approaching comfort, even in the second row. Now, the quirks. If ever a car was calling out for a push-button start, it's this MG4. Theoretically, you're supposed to just get in and go, much like you do in a Tesla or a Polestar. The reality, though, is much more of a lucky dip, and you find yourself stamping on the brake to try and activate it, to get it into gear. It is far from seamless, and it can be infuriating. Also, this screen is very handy. You get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, of course, but it is very fidgety, and you have to be super specific with your pinpoint touches to make it do what you want it to do. And I have found myself jabbing at it multiple times to try and get it to do what I want. And last but not least, this wireless charging pad is great. They're a great addition to any car, but with not much in the way of a border, going around a corner too fast will make your phone fly straight off it. Again, just an interesting kind of design quirk that doesn't feel all that thought through. Finally, and perhaps this is the most important, the vision out of the MG4 just isn't all that great, especially at the rear where that rear windscreen gets blocked by the seat backs. You can't really see out it all that clearly. A problem that's kind of compounded by the fact that the rear view camera isn't all that sharp either, especially at night. Welcome to the driver's seat of the MG477, and of course we're in the city, or at least in the urban suburbs, where I'm absolutely convinced that an EV like this does its absolute best work. And I guess first things first, I've got to say a lot of modern EVs tend to feel a bit samey, and I think it's because of the way the power is delivered. There's no gearbox to critique, no revving engine. They're really just point and shoot devices, and as a result, it's kind of hard to differentiate between them sometimes. But that's not really the case with this MG. They've done a great job of making this feel like it's been tuned to Australian driving tastes. And by that I mean the ride is a little bit firm, but it feels kind of sporty and connected. And there's none of that sort of slushy vagueness to the steering. It's nicely weighted and nicely direct. Also, one of the things you find with electric vehicles, which tend to deliver a lot of power through their front wheels, is that you can get a lot of chirping through the front tyres, even on dry days, and they can be catastrophic in the wet. But because this one is rear-wheel drive, you don't really get any of that. You just put your foot down and away you go. But there are a couple of downsides that I've discovered over my time with the vehicle, and a few of them we've touched on so far. Getting in and going can feel very, very annoying as you're waiting for the car to kind of spool up and get started. The screen is very fidgety, but I know we've covered that already. But I'm just starting to worry about some of the long-term wear and tear on a vehicle like this. I'm already starting to get some rattles through this center console here on the wrong road surfaces. And these door materials, even though they look really lovely, are already starting to look a bit scratched and worn. This car's only 6,500 Ks old, although it is worth pointing out that journalist cars are a bit like dog years. We tend to put them through a lot more work than regular owners, so in real terms, it's probably a lot older than the kilometres suggest. Elsewhere though, I have to say, having now driven a lot of EVs in the city, when I get back into a petrol-powered car now, they tend to feel a little bit old-fashioned, like I've gone back in time. I find myself wondering, why am I dealing with this kind of slow spooling turbo, or this fidgety gearbox, or this overly revvy, buzzy engine, when I know technology like this exists? In the city, they really are the perfect car, provided, of course, you have somewhere to charge them. Now, you could argue that the opposite is true outside of town. EVs are at their least efficient at freeway speeds, which means you'll be looking for charging more regularly. And of course, without a home to return to plug in, that means you'll be relying on public charging infrastructure, which still is a little bit touch and go. That said, if you're only making the occasional trip, then an EV will definitely work for you. But if you are a cross-country adventurer, the technology probably isn't there just yet. To be honest with you, where I think EVs make the absolute most sense is in a two-car family. So you have one car that does your urban runabout during the week, you plug it in maybe once a week, maybe even once a fortnight, and you never see a petrol station again. And then you have another car that handles your long-distance touring, your adventure stuff, all that kind of gear, which is inevitably powered by a petrol, diesel, or hybrid engine. All in all though, in terms of drive experiences, I still think this MG is the best of the Chinese bunch at the moment. It just feels the most suited to Australia and Australian tastes, and it really is a treat to pilot through the city. Now, do you remember when I told you that the truth lies somewhere in the middle? Well, it's also true of the verdict of this MG4. If you live mostly or entirely in the city, I just don't think you'd go back to a petrol-powered car. Driving an EV is so much easier and easier to recharge as well, provided, of course, you have off-street parking and access to a wall box. If you don't, if you live in an apartment building and you rely entirely on public charging infrastructure, or if you take a lot of longer trips at the weekend, then perhaps an EV is best served as your second car, while the ICE acts acts as your sort of adventure vehicle for the weekends. Now remember, this is just my experience of this EV, but to read the full review on the MG4 and all of its rivals, make sure you head over to carsguide.com.au.